Okay friends, one of the first things we have to do is safely raise and support the rear of the truck, and then of course we're going to remove all of our lug nuts and then the wheel. Now the next thing we need to do is break free our banjo bolt. That's going to be the bolt that holds the brake line to the caliper itself. Make sure it's broken free and then snug it back up so no brake fluid comes out. Go ahead and remove our caliper to caliper slider bolts. There's going to be 2 of them. We need to get them both out of there. Remove your caliper. Get this off of there. Now you're going to want to inspect your caliper. If you see any fluid that looks like it's coming out of this boot right here, that means that you have to replace your caliper. As you can tell, this one's been leaking for a while. It needs to be replaced. Let's go ahead and get these pads out of here. Well, there we are. Now the next thing we need to do is remove our caliper bracket bolts. Okay friends, now it's time to prep our new caliper. To do that, obviously we want to take off our caliper slider bolts. There's 2 of them. I'm going to make sure that I hold the caliper slider so it can't spin, and then we'll remove the bolt. Remove the bolts, set those aside, remove the caliper from the bracket. Now that that's apart, let's continue on to grabbing our sliders. We'll go ahead and remove them. Now remove those boots. Let's go ahead and straighten those out. I'm going to go right inside this port right here. Go ahead and put a good amount of lubricant right on there, on the inside, and then I'm going to get along that outer lip as well. You don't need to get all the way around the lip, because I'll show you in a second why. Now let's go ahead and lubricate our caliper slider. Get along the entire shaft of it, and then down along this ridge right along here. That's going to be the area where your boot's going to ride. Now let's go ahead and take our caliper slider boot. I'm going to put it right onto the caliper bracket here, and give it a nice spin. That's going to help ensure that the grease makes its way around the entire channel. Let's go ahead and slide in our slider. Push it all the way in till it bottoms out, and then give that a nice spin as well. Do the same to both. Alright, next let's continue with our caliper grease, and we're going to go right along our 4 corners, right along here. This is where your caliper tins are going to be. After you have it completely lubricated, let's continue on by putting on our tins. Just going to line it up just like this, and press it right in. Down along this area here, you want to give that a nice squeeze just to ensure that it's completely locked in. Do the same to both. Use a little bit of that caliper grease. We're going to go right along the piston here, essentially just on the mating surfaces where the caliper is going to touch up against the pads. Right along the piston, and then both of these ears. Now let's go ahead and turn that caliper, and we're going to put on our tin. You're going to notice that you have a little tab right here. We're going to put that tab facing towards the piston, right up along this area right here. Now I'm just going to go ahead and carefully push this down and lock it in. There we are. Now back over at the truck, let's continue by putting on our caliper bracket with our caliper bracket bolts. I always like to use a little bit of red thread locker on these. We'll go ahead and snug them up, and then we'll torque them to 52 foot-pounds. Okay, now it's going to be time to put on our brake pads. What you're going to notice is you have wear indicators on them. We want to essentially line these up so we have the wear indicators both facing on the same side here. Let's put the top area in, line up the bottom, and put that in as well. You should feel these be able to flow nicely. Do the same for the outer pad. That feels good. Let's pinch off the brake hose. Now with a collection bucket underneath this, we're going to continue on to removing our banjo bolt. Let's go ahead and recycle this. Now let's start taking this apart. You definitely want to make sure that you have both of your crush washers off of there. And then of course we're going to clean up this area so there's no more debris. Now it's time to grab our new banjo bolt and our new crush washers. Let's go ahead and slide one of those onto the banjo bolt. We'll grab the caliper, remove our little rubber plug here. Now I'm just going to take my banjo bolt with one of my crush washers, put it down and through the line. I'm going to take my other crush washer, put it down along the bottom of the banjo bolt so it's in between the flex hose and the caliper, and then we'll go ahead and put this on. Let's snug it up. Now let's take our caliper, slide it right over those pads, push in on the sliders so we can slide the caliper over it, and then of course we'll put on our slider bolts with a little bit of red thread locker. Okay, now let's go ahead and snug them up and torque them to 23 foot-pounds. I'm going to hold the slider so it doesn't spin and snug it up. Now we're just going to continue on by snugging up that banjo bolt a little bit more. The torque for this is supposed to be 33 foot-pounds, but I wouldn't be able to torque this without it being mounted, and there's no space to actually get my torque wrench in. Essentially, I just want to make sure that it's nice and tight, and I'm crushing those washers so I can't leak any fluid. Okay, so now it's going to be time to go ahead and bleed our caliper. Just something that I want to mention real quick is, of course, if you're doing both rear calipers, you're going to want to start with the right rear, the one that's farthest from the master cylinder. Now the next thing we want to do is take a peek under the hood. We're going to come right over here to the master cylinder and make sure that it's full. If it's low, you need to, of course, add to it. And when you add, double check and make sure you use .3 brake fluid. Now the next thing we need to do is bleed our caliper. To do that, of course, we need to remove the cover. And then we're going to open up this bleeder screw right here, and we're going to let it gravity bleed a little bit, essentially till we see some nice clear fluid coming out. Okay, so now that we have some fluid coming out, let's go ahead and close this off, and we'll get ready for our manual bleed. Okay, so now that we have this gravity bled, the next thing we need to do is our manual bleed, like I said before. For this, it's going to be easiest with 2 people. We're going to need a second person up inside the truck. Essentially, what we're going to have them do is go ahead and pump up the brake 3 to 5 times. Once it feels as though it's semi-firm, we're going to have them hold on to it, and then I'm going to open up this bleeder screw. As you open it, you're going to see the fluid come shooting out of this, and of course, a little bit of air bubbles at the same time. So be very careful for your eyes. Make sure you're wearing hand and eye protection. We're going to do this several times until we see a steady flow of fluid coming out of this bleeder screw without any air. Let's get started. All right, so we're clear to pump. Now that he's holding, I'm just going to carefully open this up, and we want to pay attention to the bleeder screw and just watch for some air bubbles coming out of this. Essentially what we're waiting for is a nice steady stream of only brake fluid. I just closed it. Go ahead and pump it again. So as I'm looking at this, I'm noticing that I don't have any more air bubbles coming out of it. With that said, I'm just going to close this off. We'll do it one more time just to ensure there's no air bubbles, and hopefully we'll be all set. All right, the last 2 times I got no air bubbles, so let's go ahead and clean this off and put on our rubber cover. Perfect. Let's go ahead and get the wheel up on here, hopefully. Start on all of our lug nuts. We'll snug them up, and then we'll get it on the ground and torque them to 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Of course, if you have your lug nut covers, let's go ahead and make sure we put those on as well. There we are. Now all you have left to do is go ahead and pump up the brake pedal, check your master cylinder for your brake fluid, and of course, take it for a road test.